They say, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But they never tell you what it costs. They never mention the parts of you that had to die so you could survive. The scars no one sees. The armor you built from broken bones and betrayal. The silence you learned to live in because no one was coming to save you. You know what I'm talking about. You felt it before you could name it. That cold, creeping realization that childhood wasn't supposed to feel like war, but yours did. And while everyone else was learning how to play, you were learning how to endure. That's the difference. That's the mark. You didn't get a choice. You got a curriculum in suffering, and the only way to graduate was to become something else entirely. Something most people will never understand. They look at you now and see normalcy, maybe success, maybe confidence. But you know the truth. You know what's underneath. You know what it took to build the person they see. And here's the thing no one wants to say out loud. That pain didn't just damage you. It forged you. It gave you gifts wrapped in trauma. Superpowers hidden in the wreckage. Traits so rare, so specific, that psychologists have spent decades trying to decode them. But you don't need a study to tell you what you already feel. You just need someone to finally name it, to pull it out of the shadows and show you that you're not broken. You're rebuilt. And what you're rebuilt with is something most people will never possess because they never had to pay the price. Let's start with the first trait. Hyper-awareness. You see things others miss. Not because you're paranoid, not because you're overthinking, but because you had to. When you grow up in chaos, you learn to read the room before you walk into it. You learn to detect shifts in tone, changes in energy, the slight tension in someone's jaw before they exploded. You became a human radar because survival demanded it. While other kids were watching cartoons, you were watching faces, studying patterns, memorizing who was safe and who wasn't. You learned that safety wasn't given. It was earned by being invisible or indispensable. So you adapted. You became fluent in body language, in micro-expressions, in the unspoken rules that governed your home. And now, as an adult, you walk into rooms and you just know. You feel the emotional temperature. You sense the lies people tell themselves. You catch the inconsistencies in their stories before they finish the sentence. People call it intuition, but it's not magic. It's scar tissue. It's the result of a childhood spent navigating minefields disguised as dinner tables. You notice when someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes. You hear what people don't say, and while everyone else is taking things at face value, you're 3 steps ahead, already calculating outcomes, already preparing for the worst. Because hope is expensive, and you learned early that assuming the best is a luxury you couldn't afford. But here's where it gets dangerous. That hyper-awareness doesn't turn off. It doesn't take vacations. It runs in the background like a program you can't close. You're scanning, always scanning, even in safe spaces, even with people who've proven themselves, because part of you is still that kid waiting for the other shoe to drop. And that's exhausting. It's why you can't fully relax, why you overthink text messages, why you replay conversations at 3 in the morning, dissecting every word, every pause, looking for the hidden threat. You're not crazy. You're conditioned, and the world doesn't make space for that. They tell you to let go, to trust more, to stop being so guarded, but they don't understand that your guard isn't a choice. It's a reflex. It's the reason you're still here, and dismantling it feels like disarming yourself in the middle of a war that never officially ended. So you carry it. You carry the weight of constant vigilance, because the alternative is vulnerability. And vulnerability, in your experience, leads to pain. The second trait is something most people romanticize, but never truly understand. Emotional independence. You don't need people the way others do. You learned early that relying on someone else is a gamble, and the house always wins. So you stopped playing. You became your own parent, your own therapist, your own best friend, not because you wanted to, but because you had to. When you're a child, and the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from, you learn a brutal lesson: you are alone. Not in the philosophical sense, not in the poetic, existential way people talk about loneliness, but in the raw, mechanical reality that no one is coming. No one is going to fix this. No one is going to save you. So you save yourself. You become resourceful. You learn to soothe your own fears, solve your own problems, carry your own weight. You stop asking for help, because asking was met with silence, or worse, punishment. And over time, that isolation hardens into something unbreakable: independence, self-reliance, the ability to function entirely on your own terms. People admire it now. They call you strong, resilient, self-sufficient, and you are. But what they don't see is the cost. The fact that you're independent, not because you want to be, but because depending on others feels like handing them a loaded gun and hoping they don't pull the trigger. You've built a life where you don't need anyone, and that's both your strength and your prison. Because here's the paradox: you crave connection, but you've trained yourself to survive without it. You want to be seen, but you've mastered the art of being invisible. You want to be loved, but you've convinced yourself that love is conditional, transactional, temporary. So you keep people at arm's length. You let them in, but only so far. You show them the parts of you that are palatable, polished, safe. But the real you, the one that still carries the weight of those childhood nights, stays hidden, because vulnerability is risk. And risk, in your economy, is something you can't afford. So you perform intimacy. You mirror what you think people want to see. You give just enough to seem open without actually opening. And it works. People think they know you, but they don't. They know the version you've constructed, the one that doesn't need anything, the one that's fine, always fine, even when you're falling apart. But here's what emotional independence really is. It's not strength, it's a defense mechanism. It's the scar tissue around a wound that never fully healed. And the problem with never needing anyone is that you forget how to let anyone in. You forget that connection isn't weakness, that asking for help isn't failure, that being vulnerable doesn't mean you're going back to that helpless child you once were. But unlearning that takes time, it takes intention, and most importantly, it takes the terrifying act of trusting someone enough to show them the parts of you that aren't strong, the parts that are still scared, still angry, still wondering why it had to be you. The third trait is the one that makes you uncomfortable when you hear it out loud. High tolerance for pain, not just physical pain, though you've probably got that too, but emotional pain, psychological pain, the kind of suffering that would break most people. You endure it. You've endured it your whole life, and somewhere along the way, you started to believe that pain is just part of the deal. That discomfort is normal. That struggle is what you deserve. When you grow up in an environment where pain is constant, your nervous system recalibrates. It adjusts its baseline. What would be unbearable to someone else becomes your Tuesday. You learn to function through migraines, through heartbreak, through betrayal. You compartmentalize. You push through because acknowledging the pain feels more dangerous than just carrying it. So you carry it. You carry tension in your shoulders, anxiety in your chest, exhaustion in your bones. And you keep moving because movement is survival. Stillness is when the ghosts catch up. People look at you and marvel at your endurance. How do you do it? How do you keep going when everything's falling apart? And you shrug. You deflect. Because you don't know how to explain that you're not enduring by choice. You're enduring because you don't know any other way. Pain has become so normalized that peace feels suspicious. Calm feels like the setup for something worse. So you stay in motion. You stay busy. You fill every moment with productivity, with distraction, with noise. Because silence is where the pain lies. And if you slow down long enough to feel it, you're afraid it might consume you. So you don't slow down. You keep pushing. You keep achieving. You keep proving to yourself and everyone else that you're fine, that you're strong, that nothing can break you. But the truth is you've been breaking for years, slowly, quietly, in ways no one sees. And your tolerance for pain isn't a superpower. It's a symptom, a sign that you've been surviving in crisis mode for so long that you've forgotten what safety feels like. The fourth trait is the one people misunderstand the most. They see it and think you're cold, detached, maybe even cruel, but you're not. You're just operating from a different rule book. Emotional detachment, the ability to disconnect from feelings when you need to cut the cord, to walk away without looking back. And here's the thing, that's not sociopathy, that's survival architecture. When you're a child and emotions become weapons used against you, you learn to stop giving people ammunition. You learn to feel less, or more accurately, you learn to feel everything and show nothing. You build a wall between what you experience internally and what you display externally, because showing fear got you punished. Showing sadness got you dismissed. Showing anger got you hurt. So you learned the most valuable skill a child in chaos can learn. You learn to go numb on command, to shut down the parts of you that make you vulnerable, to become stone when you need to be. Now, as an adult, you can flip that switch without even thinking about it. Someone betrays you. Click. Gone. No dramatics. No public meltdown. You just remove them from your life like editing a sentence. Someone disappoints you. Click. Expectations adjusted. You recalibrate and move forward. People don't understand how you do it, how you can care so deeply one moment and seem completely indifferent the next. They call you heartless, cold-blooded. But what they don't realize is that detachment isn't the absence of feeling. It's the management of it. It's you deciding that your peace matters more than their presence. That your sanity is worth more than their explanation. You've already lived through abandonment. You've already survived rejection. So when it happens again, it doesn't destroy you. It just confirms what you already knew, that people leave, that trust is temporary, that the only person you can truly rely on is yourself. But here's the shadow side. That detachment bleeds into everything, even the good things, even the people who deserve your trust. You're so good at cutting people off that sometimes you do it preemptively. Before they can hurt you, you hurt them. Before they can leave, you push them away. You engineer the ending so you can control it, because being left feels like death, but leaving feels like power. So you choose power every time. You ghost people who care about you. You sabotage relationships that could actually work. You create distance in moments that call for closeness. Not because you don't want connection, but because connection requires keeping your heart accessible. And an accessible heart is a target. You learn that lesson in blood and tears, and some lessons don't get unlearned. They get managed. So you manage. You keep everyone at the perfect distance. Close enough to not be alone. Far enough to never be hurt. And you tell yourself it's better this way. Safer this way. That you're protecting yourself. But late at night, when the world goes quiet, and you're alone with your thoughts, you wonder. You wonder what it would be like to let someone stay, to let someone see you unfiltered and not use it against you, to take the risk of being hurt, because the alternative, this constant state of controlled isolation, is its own kind of death. The fifth trait is the most dangerous one. And it's the reason you're listening to this right now. The need to prove yourself, to validate your existence through achievement, through success, through becoming undeniable. When you grow up feeling invisible, inadequate, or unwanted, you develop a hunger that most people will never understand. A need to show the world that they were wrong about you. That you're not the worthless kid they treated you like. That you're not broken. That you're exceptional. So you work. You work harder than everyone around you. You sacrifice sleep, relationships, health. You push yourself beyond reasonable limits, because reasonable limits are for people who had reasonable childhoods. You didn't, so you operate in extremes, all or nothing, success or failure, proof or worthlessness. There's no middle ground in your psychology. Because middle ground feels like settling, and settling feels like admitting that maybe they were right. Maybe you are just average, just damaged, just another statistic from a broken home. So you build empires to prove a point. You chase titles, money, recognition, not because you're greedy, not because you're materialistic, but because every achievement is evidence. Evidence that you survived, that you transcended, that you turned your pain into power and your trauma into triumph. People look at your success and see ambition, but you know the truth. It's not ambition. It's compensation. You're trying to fill a void that no amount of success can actually fill, because the validation you're seeking isn't external, it's internal. It's that child inside you who still doesn't believe they're enough, who still hears the voices that said they'd amount to nothing, who still carries the shame of abuse, neglect, or abandonment like a scar across their identity. And you're trying to prove to that child that they were wrong, that you made it, that you're somebody now. But here's the cruel irony. No matter how much you achieve, that child doesn't feel it. The void remains, the hunger persists. So you set another goal, you chase another milestone. You tell yourself that this next thing will finally be enough. This promotion, this amount of money, this level of recognition, but it never is. Because you're using success to medicate a wound that success can't heal, and the world loves you for it. Society celebrates your work ethic, your dedication, your refusal to quit. They give you awards for your resilience. They write articles about your comeback story, but they don't see the machinery underneath. The compulsion, the fear, the belief that if you stop producing, if you stop achieving, you'll become invisible again. You'll go back to being that kid no one cared about. So you can't stop. You won't stop. Even when your body is screaming for rest. Even when your mind is begging for peace. Because stopping feels like dying. And you've already died 1,000 small deaths in childhood. You're not going back to that. So you keep climbing. Keep fighting, keep proving. But to who? The people who hurt you aren't watching. They're not keeping score. Most of them don't even remember. Or if they do, they've rewritten the story so they're not the villain. So you're performing for an audience that doesn't exist, trying to prove yourself to ghosts. And that's the trap. That's the cage you've built with your own hands. But here's what you need to understand. These 5 traits: hyper-awareness, emotional independence, high tolerance for pain, emotional detachment, the need to prove yourself. They're not flaws. They're not weaknesses. They're adaptations. They're what you develop to survive an environment that was fundamentally unsafe. And they worked. They got you here. They kept you alive when staying alive wasn't guaranteed. So first, you need to acknowledge that. You need to give yourself credit for the fact that you survived, that you adapted, that you became something functional out of something broken. Because most people don't make it. Most people who endure what you endured end up destroyed by it. Addicted, institutionalized, dead, but not you. You turned your pain into a toolkit. You weaponized your trauma. And that's not nothing. That's everything. But here's the part they don't tell you in those motivational videos. Those same traits that saved you as a child are now limiting you as an adult. The hyper-awareness that kept you safe is now keeping you anxious. The emotional independence that protected you is now isolating you. The pain tolerance that got you through is now preventing you from acknowledging when something's actually wrong. The detachment that was armor is now a barrier to real intimacy, and the need to prove yourself that's driving your success is also destroying your peace. Because you're still running, still fighting, still operating like you're in danger, even though the war is over. Your nervous system hasn't gotten the memo. It's still stuck in that childhood home, scanning for threats, preparing for attacks, assuming the worst. And until you address that, until you do the deep, uncomfortable work of rewiring your survival responses, you'll keep achieving and keep feeling empty. You'll keep succeeding and keep feeling like a fraud. You'll keep building and keep feeling like it's not enough. So what do? How do you take these traits, these double-edged gifts, and transform them from survival mechanisms into actual superpowers? That's what we're about to explore. Because the difference between someone who was traumatized and someone who's transcended their trauma isn't the absence of scars. It's the decision to stop letting those scars dictate their future. It's the choice to acknowledge the pain, honor what it taught you, and then consciously decide who you want to become now that you're no longer in survival mode. That's the shift. That's the evolution. And it starts with a simple but terrifying question. What would you do differently if you actually believed you were safe? That question isn't rhetorical. It's a scalpel. It cuts through every defense mechanism you've built, every wall you've erected, every pattern you've normalized. Because the truth is, you're not operating from safety. You're operating from the assumption that danger is always one mistake away, that betrayal is inevitable, that loss is just a matter of time. And that assumption, that core belief, is running your entire life from the shadows. It's why you work yourself to exhaustion, why you can't accept compliments, why you test people to see if they'll stay, why you keep one foot out the door in every relationship, why you apologize for existing, why you prepare for everything, why you can't celebrate your wins because you're already looking for the next threat. You're living like you're still in that house, still in that situation, still that powerless child who had to read the room to survive the night. But you're not that child anymore, and the environment that required those adaptations no longer exists. Except in your mind, except in the operating system you've been running on for decades without updating it. Here's what most people don't understand about childhood trauma. It's not just about what happened. It's about what you decided about yourself because of what happened. You didn't just experience pain. You created meaning from it. You built an identity around it. Somewhere in those formative years, you made conclusions. I'm not wanted. I'm too much. I'm not enough. I have to earn love. I have to be useful to have value. I can't trust anyone. The world is hostile. I'm fundamentally alone. And those conclusions became the lens through which you see everything. They became the filter that processes every interaction, every opportunity, every relationship. Someone compliments you, and your brain says they want something. Someone gets close and your brain says they'll leave. Someone loves you and your brain says just wait. Because your belief system was formed in chaos, and chaos taught you that good things don't last. That safety is an illusion. That people who smile are often the most dangerous. So you don't trust the good moments. You wait for them to turn. You brace for impact. And sometimes, when the good doesn't turn bad on its own, you make it turn bad. You create the chaos you're familiar with, because familiar pain is less terrifying than unfamiliar peace. Let's talk about what this looks like in real terms. You get the job you wanted, the promotion, the recognition, and instead of celebrating, you immediately start worrying about losing it. You start working harder, longer. You start scanning for mistakes, for threats, for reasons they might take it away. Because in your experience, good things are always taken away. So you can't enjoy it. You can't be present in the achievement. You're already preparing for the loss. That's hypervigilance bleeding into success. Or you meet someone who actually sees you, who's patient with your walls, who shows up consistently. And instead of letting them in, you start testing them. You pull away to see if they'll chase you. You pick fights to see if they'll stay. You reveal your worst parts to see if they'll run. Because if they're going to leave, you'd rather it happen now, on your terms than later, when you're more invested. That's emotional detachment masquerading as self-protection. or your body starts breaking down. Migraines, insomnia, chronic pain. Your system is screaming that something's wrong, but you ignore it. You push through. You medicate. You normalize it. Because acknowledging that you're not okay feels like admitting weakness. And weakness in your economy is unacceptable. That's high pain tolerance turning into self-destruction. See, the traits that saved you aren't the problem. The problem is that you're still deploying them in contexts that don't require them. You're using war, time strategies, and peace-time situations. You're bringing a survival mindset to environments that are actually safe. And that mismatch is what's creating the suffering. Because you can't build intimacy with walls up. You can't experience joy while bracing for pain. You can't rest while scanning for threats. You can't connect while convinced everyone will leave. Your nervous system and your current reality are speaking different languages. And until you bridge that gap, you'll keep recreating the patterns that feel like home, even when home was hell. So how do you break the cycle? How do you rewire decades of conditioning? First, you have to do the thing you've avoided your entire life. You have to feel it, not think about it, not intellectualize it, not explain it away. Feel it, that rage you've been swallowing, that grief you've been postponing, that fear you've been outrunning. It's all still there, stored in your body, locked in your nervous system, and it's leaking out in ways you don't recognize. That sharp tone you use when you're stressed, that need to control everything, that inability to be still, that's not personality. That's unprocessed trauma-finding expression. And you can achieve every goal, make every amount of money, reach every milestone, and it will still be there, waiting. Because success doesn't heal trauma. Therapy does. Somatic work does. Sitting with the uncomfortable feelings you've been running from does. And I know that sounds impossible. I know the thought of actually feeling the full weight of what you endured is terrifying. Because if you let yourself feel it, you're afraid it will destroy you. You're afraid you'll fall apart and never come back together. But here's the truth. You're already falling apart, just slowly, in controlled increments, through burnout, through failed relationships, through panic attacks at 3 in the morning, through the exhaustion of maintaining a facade that everything's fine when nothing is fine. What you're really afraid of isn't the feeling. It's losing control. Because control is how you've survived. You controlled your reactions, your emotions, your needs. You made yourself small enough to not be a target or big enough to not be vulnerable. And the idea of releasing that control, of surrendering to the grief or the anger or the pain, feels like going back to being that powerless child. But that's the paradox. You're not powerless anymore. You have resources now. You have agency. You can choose to feel and choose to stop feeling. You can regulate yourself. You can seek support. The difference is now You're choosing to engage with the pain rather than having it inflicted on you. Now you're processing it on your terms, and that's where the power is. Not in avoiding it, not in transcending it, but in metabolizing it. In letting your system finally complete the stress response it's been stuck in for years. Here's what that looks like practically. You start small. You stop numbing. You stop distracting. You stop filling every moment with noise. You sit in silence and you notice what comes up. The anxiety, the sadness, the anger. And instead of pushing it away, you let it be there. You breathe into it. You don't need to understand it or fix it. You just need to acknowledge it. To say, yes, this is here. This is real. This is what I'm carrying. And then you make a different choice. Instead of proving yourself through another achievement, you rest. Instead of pushing someone away, you tell them you're scared. Instead of tolerating a toxic situation because your pain threshold is high, you set a boundary. You start acting like someone who believes they deserve better. Not because you feel like you deserve it, but because you're practicing the belief until it becomes real. You're creating new neural pathways, new patterns, new responses. You're teaching your nervous system that the war is over, that it's safe to put the armor down, that you don't have to fight for your right to exist anymore. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because growth isn't linear, healing isn't clean. There will be days when you backslide, when you revert to old patterns, when you self-sabotage or shut down or lash out. And your brain will tell you that you're failing, that you're broken, that change is impossible. But that's just the old programming running its script. That's the part of you that's terrified of change, because change means uncertainty. And uncertainty, in your experience, has always meant danger. So your system fights it. It creates resistance. It manufactures crises to pull you back into the familiar. Because even though the familiar is painful, it's predictable. And predictable pain is safer than unpredictable peace. But you have to override that. You have to recognize the resistance for what it is. Not truth. Not evidence that you're incapable. Just fear. Just the last desperate attempt of your trauma to keep you safe in the only way it knows how. By keeping you small. By keeping you isolated. By keeping you in survival mode. The real work is choosing differently even when it feels wrong. Choosing vulnerability even when it feels dangerous. Choosing rest even when it feels lazy. Choosing connection even when it feels risky. Choosing to believe that you're worthy even when every cell in your body is screaming that you're not. That's the battleground. That's where transformation happens. Not in the big moments, not in the breakthroughs, but in the daily, unglamorous choice to practice being someone who isn't defined by what they survived, someone who uses their past as data, not destiny, someone who acknowledges the traits they developed without being enslaved to them. Because here's what you need to hear. You are not your trauma. You are not the sum of what was done to you. You're not the abuse. You're not the neglect. You're not the abandonment. Those things happened. They shaped you. But they don't own you. Not unless you let them. And this is the part where most people get stuck. They identify so strongly with their trauma that letting it go feels like losing themselves. Who am I without my story? Who am I if I'm not the person who overcame? If I'm not the survivor? If I'm not the fighter? And that's a valid question, because your trauma has been your identity for so long that imagining yourself without it feels like erasure, like betrayal, like dishonoring what you went through. But here's the reframe. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It means integrating it. It means taking the lessons without carrying the weight. It means honoring the child you, whereby giving the adult you our permission to stop suffering, to stop punishing yourself, to stop proving anything to anyone. You've already proven enough. You survived. You endured. You made it out. And now the question is, what do you want to build with the time you have left? Do you want to spend it running from ghosts? Or do you want to spend it creating something that actually feels like freedom? Freedom. That word probably feels foreign to you, maybe even suspicious, because freedom requires trust. Trust that the ground won't collapse beneath you. Trust that you can make a mistake without it defining you. Trust that you can be seen fully and not be destroyed. And trust is the thing you've had the least access to. So when I talk about freedom, I'm not talking about some abstract philosophical concept. I'm talking about the ability to exist without constant calculation, to speak without rehearsing every word 3 times in your head first, to want something without immediately convincing yourself you don't deserve it, to be angry without apologizing for taking up space, to be happy without waiting for the punishment that happiness always seemed to bring. That's freedom, and it's available to you. But it requires you to do something that feels impossible. It requires you to grieve what you never had. Most people don't understand this part. They think healing from childhood trauma is about processing what happened, the events, the abuse, the neglect. And yes, that's part of it. But the deeper wound, the one that doesn't get talked about enough, is the loss of what should have been. You didn't just experience bad things. You were robbed of good things: safety, innocence, the ability to be a child, to make mistakes without terror, to need things without shame, to trust that the people who were supposed to protect you would actually protect you. You lost the foundation that most people build their entire lives on. And then you were expected to just figure it out, to compensate, to catch up, to pretend like you weren't operating with a completely different set of rules. And you did. You figured it out. But the cost was enormous. The cost was you, the real you. the one who had dreams that weren't about survival, the one who had needs that weren't about avoidance, the one who could have been soft if the world had let you. So you have to grieve that. You have to mourn the childhood you didn't get, the parents you deserved but didn't have, the safety that should have been your birthright. And that grief is heavy. It's suffocating because it's not just about the past. It's about the present. It's about recognizing how much of your current life is still being dictated by what you lost. How your inability to rest is because you never felt safe enough to rest. How your overachievement is because you're still trying to earn the love that should have been unconditional. How your isolation is because you learned that needing people leads to disappointment. You're not just grieving what was, you're grieving what is. The version of you that could have existed if things had been different. And that's a death, a real death of potential, of possibility, of the life you might have lived if you hadn't spent every ounce of energy just trying to survive. But here's where it shifts. Here's where the darkness becomes fuel instead of poison. Once you grieve it, once you feel the full weight of what was stolen from you, you get to make a choice. You can let that loss define the rest of your life. You can stay in the victim role. You can build an identity around your suffering and use it to explain every failure, every relationship that doesn't work, every goal you don't reach. And that's valid. That's a choice. But it's also a prison. Because if your trauma is always the reason you can't, then you never have to confront the scarier truth. That maybe now, as an adult with agency and resources, you're choosing not to. You're choosing the familiar patterns because they're easier than the unknown. You're choosing to stay small because being big means being visible. And being visible means being vulnerable to criticism, to judgment, to rejection. So you hide behind your trauma. You use it as a shield, as an excuse, as a way to opt out of the full, messy, terrifying experience of actually living. Or you make the other choice, the harder choice. You take everything you learned in that hell and you weaponize it. Not against others, against the world that tried to break you. You take that hyper-awareness and you use it to read people, to navigate complex situations, to see opportunities others miss. You take that emotional independence and you build something that doesn't require permission or validation. You take that pain tolerance and you outwork everyone. You take that detachment and you make ruthless decisions that move you forward. You take that need to prove yourself and you channel it into creating undeniable value. You take the worst thing that ever happened to you and you turn it into your competitive advantage. Because while everyone else is comfortable, while everyone else is operating from a place of safety and security, you're operating from hunger, from fire, from a place that says, I will not be broken by this. I will not let what happened to me be the end of my story. I will take this pain and I will alchemize it into something that matters. And that's the energy that builds empires. That's the energy that changes industries. That's the energy that looks impossible in the face and says, "Watch me," because you've already done impossible. You survived a childhood that should have destroyed you. You built a functional life out of rubble. You became someone worth listening to despite every voice that told you weren't. So when life throws obstacles at you now, when people doubt you, when circumstances seem overwhelming, you have a reference point that most people don't. You have proof that you can endure, that you can adapt, that you can take the worst hand possible and still find a way to play it. That's not just resilience. That's transmutation. That's taking lead and turning it into gold. And the people who didn't have to fight the way you fought will never understand that power. They'll never have access to that fuel because their comfort made them soft. Their safety made them risk-averse. Their stable childhoods gave them everything except the edge that comes from having nothing to lose. But here's the critical part. The part where most people with your background self destruct. You have to know when to stop fighting. You have to recognize when the war is over. Because if you're not careful, you'll spend your entire life in battle mode. You'll achieve everything you set out to achieve and still feel empty. Still feel like you're not enough. Still feel like you're one mistake away from losing everything. You'll build success on top of unhealed trauma and wonder why nothing feels satisfying, why every win feels hollow, why you can't enjoy what you've created. And the answer is simple. You're still running from that child. You're still trying to prove to them that they're worthy. But you can't. Because that child doesn't exist in your present. They exist in your past. And no amount of future success will go back in time and heal them. The only thing that heals them is you, now, as an adult, turning around and acknowledging them, telling them it's over, telling them they're safe, telling them they did good, they survived, and now they can rest. This is the work no one wants to do, because it's not sexy. It's not marketable. You can't put it on a vision board. It's internal. It's uncomfortable. It requires you to sit with the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. The scared parts, the ashamed parts, the parts that still believe the lies that were told to you. And it requires you to re-parent yourself, to give yourself the compassion you never received, the patience, the unconditional acceptance. You have to become for yourself what no one was for you. And that feels ridiculous at first. Talking to yourself, comforting yourself, setting boundaries with yourself. But it's the only way forward. Because if you don't do this work, if you don't integrate these parts, you'll keep sabotaging. You'll keep pushing away the good things. You'll keep creating chaos because chaos is what you know. And you'll die having achieved everything and experienced nothing. having won every external battle while losing the internal war. So let me tell you what the evolved version of you looks like. The version that's done the work. They still have the hyper-awareness, but they use it consciously. They can read a room, but they don't let it dictate their behavior. They notice the red flags, but they don't run at the first sign of imperfection. They give people a chance. They give situations a chance, because they've learned to distinguish between actual danger and the echoes of past danger. They still have emotional independence, but they've softened it. They can ask for help without it feeling like surrender. They can lean on people without losing themselves. They've learned that interdependence isn't weakness, that sharing your burden doesn't make you a burden. They still have high pain tolerance, but they've learned to honor their limits. They know the difference between pushing through and pushing too far. They rest before they break. They ask for support before they collapse. They treat their body like an ally instead of an obstacle. They still have the ability to detach, but they choose when to deploy it. They don't cut people off at the first disappointment. They communicate. They repair. They stay when it's hard, because they've learned that hard doesn't always mean wrong, but they also walk away with clarity when something is genuinely toxic. No guilt. No drama, just a clean break and a commitment to their peace. They still have drive, but it's no longer compensation. It's creation. They build because they want to, not because they have to prove something. Their worth isn't attached to their output. They can rest without existential crisis. They can fail without identity crisis. They pursue excellence because it feels good, not because they're terrified of being average. This version of you is free, not because they've forgotten where they came from, but because they've decided where they're going. And where they're going isn't determined by where they've been. Here's the brutal truth that no one tells you. Most people who endured what you endured don't make it this far. They don't get to the point where they're analyzing their patterns, questioning their programming, seeking to evolve. They stay stuck. They stay bitter. They recreate their trauma in every relationship. They self-medicate. They numb out. They give up. So the fact that you're here, listening to this, means something. It means you're not content with just surviving. You want to thrive. You want to transcend. And that desire, that refusal to let your past be your ceiling, that's what separates you from everyone else. That's the mark of someone who's not just enduring darkness. They're wielding it. They're taking the very thing that was meant to destroy them and turning it into their signature, their superpower, their story. But you have to make peace with something uncomfortable. You're always going to be different. You're always going to see things others don't, feel things others can't, operate on a different frequency. And that's isolating, because most people won't understand you. They won't get why you can't just relax, why you overthink, why you're so intense, why you need everything to mean something. They'll call you too much, too deep, too serious, and you'll be tempted to shrink, to dull yourself down, to pretend you're simpler than you are. But don't, because your complexity is your gift. Your intensity is your power. The depth that makes you exhausting to shallow people makes you magnetic to the right people, the ones who've done their own work, the ones who aren't afraid of real conversation, real connection, real intimacy. Those people exist, but you won't find them if you're hiding, if you're performing normalcy, if you're pretending that your childhood didn't fundamentally alter the way you see the world. So own it. Own the fact that you're not like everyone else, that you can't do surface level, that you need depth or you need distance, that you'd rather be alone than be misunderstood, that your standards are high because you've seen what happens when they're not. That's not elitism. That's self-preservation. That's you honoring everything you had to become to get here. And the right people will respect that. They'll match your energy. They'll meet your intensity. They'll see your walls and understand why they exist. And they won't ask you to take them down immediately. They'll wait. They'll prove themselves. They'll earn your trust the way trust should be earned. Slowly, consistently, through action, not words.